Welcome to the Flying High Club, everyone. This is Sahel Ali with you for our next installment of the Flying High Club podcast. And you'll notice our settings are different. I don't have a co-host with me. Raza's back in London, and we did promise you last time that we're now going international. And we're really happy to be launching the next series, which is the Middle East and Africa series. And that's based in where I call home, Dubai. So we're really excited about that. And I think we heard a lot from you in the comments. Keep those coming. Please keep liking and sharing the video. It's helping the channel more than you know. And it's allowing us the opportunity today to be here. And more importantly, the type of guests we're able to bring, which I'm going to come on to very shortly. So, like I said, very excited about what we're doing here today. Keep following us and keep showing your support. And please interact with us, because we'd love to get more interaction with you. Even get questions from you to be able to ask our guests that are coming. And if there's any guests you want to see, aviation is a great space. Travel itself is so broad. Who do you want to hear from? Please let us know. So more back to the episode. Today is the launch, and I'm really delighted to have someone with such a varied career across the globe, across the part of the world we're talking about. He's going to tell us more about that. But going from, the CEO currently of Flyadeal, which is in Saudi Arabia, a low-cost carrier, which we're going to hear more about, for being a founding member of Scoot. And again, we'll get into delving into that. And working in the loyalty place in Hong Kong, traveling across different parts of the Middle East and Africa along his career, to now be in Saudi Arabia, where we have this very exciting period of growth, the 2030 vision, and we're going to delve into that. And more importantly, how has this individual done what they've done till today, and what's next? So I'm really, really delighted to invite Stephen Greenway, the Flyadeal CEO, with us here today. Thank you, Stephen, for coming along.
Thank you, Sahel. Pleased to be here.
Yeah, perfect. So hope you're okay. How's things?
Very good, very good. Nice to be in Dubai. Bit of a change.
Yeah. So, we're going to talk about the region, because things are definitely hotting up here, not just because of the weather.
Literally and figuratively. Yeah.
Exactly. But like I said, when we got talking, looking at your journey, what a journey. And what we really want, and what our guests are really interested in, is hearing about that journey and hearing more about yourself, because I'm sure everything else about your career will come along as part of that conversation.
Yep.
So I like to start with just asking a few questions around, your career to date, where it all started, and let you go from there really, and then talk about how you got into aviation and what really makes you tick.
Sure. So I grew up in Brisbane in Australia. Was born in New Zealand, but grew up in Brisbane in Australia. And I think that I was always preordained to go into airlines, because my father used to work for Qantas, my mum used to work for Qantas, and my sister, when I was growing up, was working for Qantas. I think all of them had done at least 10, 20 years. My dad did 35. So there was a sort of airline blood, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Very similar to us. That's where it started for us as well.
So it's quite sad. It's quite sad. I didn't have a choice. And I actually did. When I went through school, and then when I went to university, I did political science and economics degrees. And I was actually really interested in politics and working for the Australian government. And so I sort of set myself on a course for that. And I literally, it was back in the day when they used to advertise in the papers and so forth. And I actually... my father had retired, my mum had retired, and my sister was still working for Qantas. But they posted, "Would you like to be, in an advertisement? Would you like to join as a graduate, the Qantas graduate scheme?" I hadn't really thought of it. I was actually applying for, if I can recall, Department of Finance. I think Department of Treasury and Finance in the Australian federal government, and I was going through the process and what have you. Actually went down to Canberra for interviews. So I was on that path, and I was interviewed for the Qantas graduate program. They flew me down to Sydney, and I was offered the job. And I just sort of, so I was very lucky at that time. I had a couple of offers on the table, and I chose Qantas. And then something actually interesting came up. I was offered, because I did an economics degree, I was offered an exchange with the Bank of Finland, of all places. I actually had two choices. I had the Bank of England and the Bank of Finland as a trainee economist, so to speak, and great opportunity. And I actually chose Finland because you can go to the UK on an Australian passport very easy. You get a visa and everything. And I thought, if I want to go to the UK, I can do that by myself. whereas Finland, it sounded quite exotic. Didn't think I'd ever live there in my life, so why not try that? And so I actually negotiated with Qantas to give me a year in lieu, so to speak. So
this was during the graduate program?
Yeah, I hadn't started the graduate program, so they actually delayed my entry to the next, what would you call it, intake, I suppose. And so I sort of said to them, look, this opportunity's come up. I think it's really good for you, for me, and everything. And it's for 1 year. Can I come into the next intake the following year? Yeah. So it took a bit of a risk because they could have cancelled the intake, depending, but they did say yes. And
so what gave you the kind of, I'm just thinking there's a lot of clarity here, you know, in terms of, you know, what you wanted to do. Yeah. And, you know, most people coming out of, you know, our listeners coming out of university are trying to grab at the first opportunity.
Yeah.
But you actually took that time to kind of consider, you had that on the table, you had a couple on the table. Yeah. What was the kind of thought process that you went through?
Well, I think, I hate to show my age, I just turned 50 this year. And so we're talking, you know, to be fair, so that was about 30 years ago. I hate to say that, I really do, it's shocking. But a degree back in those days was worth a lot more. You know, they were rarer, so to speak. I'm not criticizing degrees today or anything like that, but the reality was back in those days, the throughput of universities was much smaller as a total proportion of graduates, and fewer people went from high school to university and so forth. So when you did get a degree, you know, there were fewer of you there, fewer that had degrees, and there were more opportunities, I think.
Okay.
It's not that a degree is a dime a dozen these days, but there's certainly you've got far more choices as an employer than you had 30 years ago. So I was very lucky. I had reasonable grades. I had 2 degrees. I was trading off my economics degree more than anything else because that was the more practical one to go into banking or to what have you. And the political science I did just because I enjoyed it. You know, I enjoyed the rigor and you know, my family's quite political, that we love following politics and everything. So that's sort of where it came from. But it was as I said, my view was at the time that I wanted to do federal government in Canberra. I wanted to do public service. That's what I was really interested in. And it just, as I said, it just so happened this intersection came where Qantas came along, and I thought I'd never considered it. Funny enough, even though my family had at the time, you know, were all working or had been working, I'd actually never considered going.
Didn't have your dad trying to angle?
No,
like,
no,
you know,
not at all. Not at all. I loved it. I actually looked at being a pilot before I went to university. You know, it was back in the day. You know, you couldn't get any financial support. It was, and it was even back in those days. It was 100,000 Australian dollars. That was a lot of money back then. And I remember I went out to the air schools and everything, and my head run over my heart, I suppose, to your point about sort of trying to map out things. I was just about to sign up, and I thought that, you know, it's not like today where pilots are in shortage. Pilots were dime a dozen back then, and you couldn't get a job. And so here I was sitting there going, am I going to spend 100,000? I may fail. Or I may succeed, but then even if I succeed, I might not have a job, and I've got this debt hanging over my head. So the far more safer route, so you know, theoretically, is go through uni and then get a job, and which is exactly what I did. And then, as I said, this opportunity in Finland came along, and I thought, this sounds really interesting. I can leverage my degrees. I can do something different. I can be paid to go and live in a different country, which is quite exotic, and it was quite exotic. And I worked for a Bank of Finland, worked for the central bank, and I thought to myself that really ticks boxes. So I think it was that I was just very lucky. It sounds like it was all preordained, or I thought it through.
I guess it always does when you look back, right? It looks a lot clearer than when you were that.
And even the government roles, everyone sits the same exam, and then depending on your marks, you're allowed to apply to certain departments, like Department of Foreign Affairs or Department of Finance or what have you. So again, it was just, I sort of just navigated things, and things sort of just fell into place. So I was very lucky in that perspective.
And just in terms of that wanting to travel overseas, because I think obviously that's kind of been your career, and I'm going to ask you more about that as we get along. But again, like as a graduate, was it the fact that you'd grown up around travel that maybe made that more comfortable?
Yeah, and I remember my family sort of stood out. I mean, we were middle class. We weren't not even upper middle class or what have you. I think we were genuine middle class. I was the first kid in our family to go to a private school. My parents, you know, scrimped and saved to be able to do that. But you had free travel. You know, you had free travel on Qantas and everything. So, you know, my dad used to. I remember going sometimes to Singapore for Christmas and not thinking too much of it. I thought it was special, it was enjoyable, but you know, other kids were staying home. And to me, I was the only child, and my parents would just pack up and off we went for a couple of days. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. But I never thought of it until I grew older that, you know, that was actually something that was very special. I was doing a lot of stuff that, was out of the reach of some families because they simply couldn't afford it at that time.
Absolutely.
And so very, very lucky that gave me the exposure. And my parents are pretty adventurous in terms of, they didn't think anything of just getting up and going and doing something. And, so I really thank them for that, because it engendered in me a sort of a traveling spirit and an inquisitive spirit. And to me, moving overseas, living, working, what have you, and moving around and traveling was second nature. So it was not something that was very daunting to me when I grew up.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And you're right. I think one of the key benefits of working in the industry are those travel perks, and actually it does encourage a lot of people. And I think it does give you the opportunity to, like you say, I'd say take advantage, right? Because you're absolutely right. As much as we want those customers on our seats, it doesn't always happen as much as we'd like it to.
It doesn't, but again, 30 years ago, planes were a lot less full, and you had the chances. But I always remember we used to get stuck in all sorts of places. We got stuck in Moscow, we got stuck in London, we got stuck in wherever. Yeah. And again, we were a relatively small family, so we had this routine. Okay, if it's one seat, someone goes. If it's two seats, two. And so we didn't.
I feel like I'm living my childhood through the stories.
We didn't really care. It's just one of those things, and we all had our own little. I remember we all had our own. I even had my own little bag with my own little toiletries kit, just in case we got separated, just in case we got stuck. Yeah. I mean, it sounds all very dramatic, but it's not meant to be. But we were quite mobile as a family,
but
so I was very lucky with that.
Independence, right? From a very young age.
I remember walking around in Moscow when it was still the Soviet Union, USSR. But it's 15, 16. My parents didn't think anything of it. I sort of went, I just want to go and explore. And they went, okay. And I don't think anyone would do that these days. Yeah, I was a little bit older. I was 15, 16, but nothing was in English, completely foreign. And I was just walking around town, just trying to sort of get a feel for it. Yeah. So again, that sort of faith in terms of what you're doing and you know where to go if you get into trouble and everything. So there was a lot of responsibility put on me, which was fantastic. Yeah. Or trust, I should say, trust. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that's the Qantas graduate scheme now. Yeah. You're there.
Yep.
And again, we find you go one of two ways, right? You kind of take it all in.
Yes. And
then that's the journey, which sounds like where we're headed with you. But you also get those, and actually you see quite a lot of successful C-suites, senior managers have come through a company grad scheme. What's your thoughts today about those kind of grad schemes?
Yeah, so my thoughts today is they're sadly missing. And I think you have the graduate schemes which seem to have disappeared in many ways. And effectively the graduate schemes, not only at Qantas, but a lot of other companies, airline and non-airline, were typically, you came in, or at least this was when I was being offered roles back at that time, that you would come in and then you would move around on rotation, typically 4 months here or 6 months here, and then you would move again. And the period would be 2 to 3 years. And this would be for a bank or whatever. In the case of Qantas, it was 3 years. You'd move around 6 months. So you'd have basically 6 places you would go, everything from operations to what have you. The trick was with Qantas that once you finished after 3 years is you had to reapply for a job. So you actually had no guarantee. But the reality is if they've invested 3 years in you and moved you around and you're decent, you weren't going anywhere. But you did, it was a bit scary. You had to sort of find a job.
Bit of jeopardy.
Yeah, a bit of jeopardy, and there were 1 or 2 that I remember that didn't find roles and had to leave and what have you. But I think companies are missing that, and some companies which were really, really good would have executive schemes, and they would take you from the graduate, and they would mold you over 10, 20, 30 years time, and you don't have that these days, longevity and roles and so forth. But, a good example would be an employer that I had 10 years ago was Singapore Airlines. They're one of the few that still do it today. They take, top tier executives and they take them through from the day they walk in the front door, and they mold them and shape them up to becoming EVPs and ultimately a CEO. And they have a pattern, you do this, you do that, you go overseas and be a country manager in one of the key markets. I think that's incredibly valuable because you're building, there is, you hear about the title general manager. You've got to think about it for a second. General manager, it means you're a generalist. You can do almost anything within the company, within reason, obviously. And I think we lack that these days, because you don't have these programs that are moving people around and giving them experience in different areas that are broad, you're lacking generalists, and it's very difficult to say take someone from an airline in a commercial function these days and put them in operations because they've never had any exposure before, as an example. So I think graduate programs and also executive programs, or call it what you will, are sadly very lacking in corporate life these days for the most part, I think.
It's a very, really, really valid point, because I think you get two schools of thoughts, right? You get those that say we need more specialists. And yes, absolutely, every industry will need its specialists. You know, you wouldn't want me messing around with the engineerings of an aircraft.
Well, you wouldn't want me a pilot, as an example, for sure.
But at the same time, as you say, you are learning so much. The airline industry, the aviation industry is so varied.
Yes.
And if you're coming through different roles and different experiences, you have more to add and different ideas to
more to add, but also more insight. You actually gravitate towards something you really like. And in the case of me, it was commercial. And I did everything from operations and what have you, catering, as an example, crewing. But what I fell in love with was commercial. That to me, and I think it was probably because of my education, because of my economics degree and so forth, that to me it just gelled very well. I was doing forecasting for the network, revenue forecasting. I was doing fleet assessments. I was doing all that. So you sort of, at least at a personal level, apart from the corporate level and the company level, it gave me a great platform to say what I really want to go into. And I chose commercial as the path. And beyond Qantas, I stuck to that. That was something that I enjoyed and I thought I was reasonably good at. So that gave me, the program gave me some insight that when I popped out in the end, this is what I wanted to do within the company.
Perfect. Okay. So then, moving on from Qantas grad scheme, where did you land? I mean, you clearly came back from Finland, so it was a good experience.
Finland was fantastic. So Finland I did for a year, loved it, and what have you. Came back. And saw Australia as being very small all of a sudden, because I was exposed. Yes, I travelled, but not lived overseas before. So here I was coming back after I'd been a year overseas, and I was by myself and all this type of stuff, and moved back in with the parents and went, okay, got some itchy feet. But then the Qantas graduate scheme started. I moved down to Sydney, so I was back on my own again. But I think the Finland thing really gave me the itchy feet and thought, Australia's really small. It was really far away from everything. And that was just my own perception. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is I just thought there was a whole world out there to explore.
Absolutely.
And so I did the graduate program 2-3 years. And funny enough, I ended up in a department which I'd never heard of before, which was e-commerce. And again, if you go back, it's 20 plus years. E-commerce was brand new. Airlines were barely implementing websites and everything. I'm really showing my age. And I was interviewed by this former squadron leader of the Royal Australian Air Force, this lady who I think scared everyone. Her name will not be mentioned, but everyone sort of said, "Oh, don't work for her. She's a nightmare." Blah 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 blah. And then I ended up working for her, and she gave me the insight to the world of e-commerce, and we did the first redemption engine of all things, frequent flyer redemption engine in the world. Wow. We then did the One World website and everything, and the launch and everything. So we were involved in that because we were taking a lead. We were chosen by the airlines every airline had a role to play, and in our case, we did the website for One World and stuff. And we just did a whole heap of interesting things that I would have never been exposed to. And that digital economy piece, or at least the infancy of it, really then drove a lot of career choices in the future as well. It gave me that tasting. The other thing which was really interesting, particularly in large corporate life and everything, is it also gave me a taste or an experience with some of the big consultancy companies, because they're everywhere, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
The BCGs, the McKinseys and stuff. And at a very young age, I got that exposure on the client side, which was quite interesting as well. And it was like, oh, okay, I can see how things are interplaying and so forth as well. So it was a great experience.
Do you think there's a big role for these consultants to play in this aviation space? Because like you said, there are lots of them about.
Yeah.
Obviously, with everything, there are pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
But what's your kind of take in terms of the role consultants play, especially for let's take yourself now as a C-suite. What value are you looking to drive out of those consultants when they come into your business?
I think, look, you have all sorts of consultants. The spectrum is very broad, to be fair. But my personal view, and I think this is informed by being an LCC, is or at least been in the LCC space for so long, is you don't pay for anything. And so that's number one. So why would you hire this big expensive consultancy or whatever to come in and tell you what to do? Number one. Number two, you've got theoretically, you've got experienced senior employees who know what to do. So why would you need someone to tell them what to do, if that makes sense? Now, there's that side of the equation where you sit there and go, no, they really don't fit, particularly in the LCC space. We'll park that for a second. There is, and I think it's sort of the view of my view has matured over time. I do believe there is a role, but it has to be very precise. You may have done an assessment on an aircraft internally, and you need to take that to the board. Sometimes getting a third party to get a second opinion is really valuable. Benchmarking is really valuable. Again, some of these consultancies are global based, and they see everything that's going on from the US to the Middle East or what have you, bringing that intel to your business and saying, okay, I'm working in the Middle East, but I'm benchmarking my unit cost as an example. So where am I sitting, and what are the drivers that are driving unit costs and so forth? That would be very difficult for you as an airline to do, wherein you bring in specialist expertise. So I think there is a role to play. I think there is a role to play from a very much a second opinion, or very much a validation of work, or very much where there's a data set or work that you don't necessarily have ready access to just because of the company that you are, as an example. And so from that perspective, I do actually believe there's a role to play. So I balance it out. I don't like paying anything, but at the same time, I can see and I can justify exercises where, yes, I really want to get in. So a good example at Flyadeal is we just did a revamp of our 10-year network plan. And so, yes, we can sit there with our own spreadsheets and what have you and try to work something out, and we do. But we got a third party in to come in and validate our thinking. And they, to be fair, there was value because they sort of said, have you thought of this? Have you looked at this? Yeah. The data that we've got sort of says maybe this is not as profitable as you think it is, etc. That is of real value to us. And it's just that second opinion, that insight. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the point, right? We look at roles in aviation traditionally. But like you say, there are other opportunities to be involved, and I think even in your career you've done that, where not necessarily directly involved with an airline, but actually very much involved in that, like you said, the e-commerce space, the commercial space, and driving that as well. So okay, cool. So let's kind of move further forward. I'd really like to delve into Scoot, so for our viewers, the infancy of Singapore Airlines' first low-cost carrier.
Correct.
And you were a founding member. I mean, so these kind of things, they really fascinate me because, again, you think about Singapore Airlines, very traditional, a long history, a way of doing things, a very good way of doing things. And they clearly see a gap. And now you're kind of, I would say, an entrepreneur? Is that what we'd call you now? You're kind of building a business from scratch?
Yeah. So I by the time Scoot had come around, I'd actually started a number of carriers like Peach in Japan. And I was actually a consultant, an advisor. But I was more, the company I worked for was more interim management, where we would come in and we would do startups, start the whole thing fresh. Usually have a local offsider who you would train up. In the case of Japan, I had a guy called Ono-san who stuck with me for 2 years and learnt the trade of LCCs. He came from ANA, so Peach was part of ANA, so an airline within an airline, similar to Jetstar and Qantas. So I'd done a couple of those as part of an advisory company, and so I was then approached by Singapore Airlines, and for all the reasons that you actually said. I mean, they were, they're renowned as being one of the premium carriers in the world. They certainly are. But the reality is that, they were being eaten alive by LCCs in the region, the AirAsias and Cebu Pax and all that type of stuff. And so they were seeing what was going on in the marketplace. They saw what Qantas and Jetstar had done. And effectively, the strategy was, well, we'll create a Jetstar-esque type of thing. Initially, it was long-haul low cost. So we started with 777s. But it was probably my proudest piece of work because I now see the yellow birds when I come into Singapore. There's like 50 of them, and I'm like, yeah, that livery was ours, and the name was ours, and everything. But starting from a clean sheet of paper, it was a long haul, low cost. You've got to remember also that in Asia, it's 6 hours to get to Japan from Singapore. So I suppose you call that medium haul. But, effectively the economics of short haul narrow body, sort of went out the window, because if you wanted to get anywhere in Asia, even into China, that's 5.5 hours. And with an old A320ceo, you couldn't make it anyway. Yeah. So you needed a wide body. And that's why you see the Cathay's of the world and SQs, they all effectively have a wide body fleet. And so we started off with second-hand 777s that we bought from Singapore Airlines and converted, and we put 390 seats or something in them. Ripped out 2 tons of in-flight entertainment systems and all sorts of stuff, and off we went. We got the thing up and running literally within less than a year and a half. I came in September, and our first flight was in June. And so it was really, and I was employee number 3, so it was less than a year. Sorry, so it was rapid. It was very, very rapid. But we had the support of Singapore Airlines as well, obviously. Yeah. So, but we were a separate company. We had our own separate functions, a different AOC, operating certificate, and so forth. But certainly, the 5-6 years that I did there, that was. It was a phenomenal ride, and Singapore's a great place to be. And Singapore Airlines is very forward thinking. They think long term. It's not. I think a lot of Western societies, it's very short termish these days. Singapore Airlines is very much, where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be in 10 years? And that's very refreshing, working within that framework.
How important is that? Now you reflect back as a senior exec, about that. I mean, that's what your role is now, right? Trying to set that path.
Yeah.
How important is that? Because as you say, you're embarking on something brand new. In the short term, like most businesses, it's probably not going to feel like it works.
Yeah.
But as you say now, when you land into Changi, you're looking across the tarmac, and there is something that started that while back and is functioning well.
Yeah, I think that long-termism is, as I said, I think it's lacking in business today. Everything is about what's the share price doing today. We'll adjust, or And I think I learned it from 2 areas. I learned it when I was in Japan. I was there when Fukushima went off, and so the tsunami hit and Fukushima went off. And the whole, if you looked at the TV, the whole world was melting down. And then I would talk to my ANA colleagues and those who were supporting and sponsoring Peach. And they said, look, this is devastating, but we have a plan. We're starting an LCC. This is not stopping. We'll adjust, but we've got to keep this long-term plan, which is get it up and running. And that, in fairness, they have. It's the one of the successful LCCs that was started up in Japan. Same thing with Singapore. And I think the more senior you go in terms of roles, the more you should be looking long term as opposed to short term. So as I've got further and further up the food chain, so to speak, and now I'm CEO, I try to deal less and less with the day to day, and try to think about what's around the corner for us in the next couple of years. Where are we going to be, and what do I need to do to get there? If that makes sense.
How do you do that, Stephen? Because you have a live operation. Currently planes going through those skies. There's always something not quite working how you envisaged it, your team envisaged it. How do you make sure you stay out of it in the nicest way possible?
It's very difficult because as an LCC, you're actually very flat. Theoretically, you're very flat. And so when something, the wheels fall off, you know about it and you're dealing with it. If you're in a larger, let's say, legacy carrier, you're 10 levels removed from the day-to-day, so to speak. So it is very difficult. And I'll give you a practical example. At the moment, we're in the Hajj season. So we're in phase 2 where we're repatriating pilgrims at this moment in time. So phase 1 is done. Phase 2 is in full swing. We finish on the 22nd of July. I'm involved on a daily basis. I have to be. If we drop the ball on anything where, it is it's serious. It's very serious from a national level, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, you can't devoid yourself of those responsibilities. For me, what I try to do is I try to have the best team I possibly can supporting me. I accept that sometimes I'm going to have to get involved in the day-to-day every day. But I try to carve out time to talk to people. I try to, it seems very lame. I read a lot. And I talk to a lot of different people, both in the company and outside the company. And I try to bring up a picture of what is going on, and I build that. And I spend a lot of my weekends thinking about that, because that's when you've got your real quiet time. I'm lucky enough I can just sort of sit down and sort of ponder. And to me, it's almost like chess pieces. You're just trying to move around chess pieces and visualize from bringing all the information that you've read about, you've spoken about, and what you're seeing firsthand is that type of chess piece play to get to where you ultimately need to be.
Okay. So look, moving away from actually, like you said, getting in the weeds.
Yeah.
but actually being on the front line. And I bring that up because, that's one of the reasons I asked you to come here, because I've been really impressed. Not that you need me to be impressed.
Tell
but
my mother.
It's seeing you out and about. How important is it for CEOs and senior managers to be out and about? And what does out and about look like? Because we can get failed managers who obviously don't bring that authenticity. So,
Sure.
How does that work?
I think it works at a couple of levels. You have headquarters and non-headquarters, the way I sort of see things. In the headquarters or HQ, whenever I have spare time, I just walk the floor. I walk around. You have to be very conscious, though, of who you are, because some people will think you're spying on them. There's the big boss looking over their shoulder, even though that's never the intent. But I think as I sort of got more and more time on the ground, people know I'm just saying, checking things out, how things going, how can I help? Reverse it. Don't sit there and go, what's going on? You just sit there and go, hey, how can I help? Anything that you heard last week that you want me to talk about or address, or any questions you have or anything like that. So I spend a lot of time literally just, I know that sounds quite lame, but literally just walking around the head office. People think I'm probably lost or something. I'm not too sure, but it's just a fact. I mean, our office, I actually have my first office I've had in 20 years. And I don't like it. I don't like being stuck in an office. I feel like I'm in a goldfish pond. But so I'm used to an open plan, and we have an open plan for the most part, but over several floors. And so, just getting that and just being there, being accessible, not being hidden away in your office, I think is really key. On the front line, so to speak, or outside of the head office, again, you just need to be very careful, because what you see is not real. In reality, if people know I'm catching a particular flight or something, everything will be perfect. My flights are never delayed. I'm very lucky, so nothing's ever cancelled on me. Not that I ask of it, but I think that, people sort of gravitate and say, the boss is flying this plane. We make sure everything is run smoothly, right?
I've been in that situation, so it's just like top of the agenda.
Yeah.
Stephen's on this flight.
It's not meant to be.
The newest equipment, the uniforms, everything's changed.
It's not meant to be, and you from walking from the terminal to walking onto the plane, I'm shaking 20 people's hands, right? So you're again that sort of that almost goldfish mentality. You have to look at it in a different way and say, what I'm seeing is not really real. What's going on? To a certain perspective, everyone's doing a great job. But equally, I went down to the Hajj terminal in Jeddah the other day, and I explicitly said, please, let's organize a time that I'm not interrupting the operation. I don't want to come in and all of a sudden there's a big hoo-ha because I'm standing there and checking things out. I don't want to interrupt the operation. The operation's first. So I think it's a very, very fine balancing act. It's trying to make as limited fuss as possible, trying to be accessible, getting on and making sure you say hello to everyone, seeing how they are. Mid-flight, once the service is done, I never get in the way of the service. I worked for one airline, interestingly, that it was actually written in your contract that you had to be serve food or clean the aircraft in flight or undertake some form of in-flight activity. And it was seen by that company as something that was very positive, that the crew would like it. The reality is when you ask the crew, they said, get out of my way.
Yeah.
We don't want you in the galley. We don't want you slowing things up. We want to get the service done. We've only got an hour. We want to get the service done. We want to get coffees done or what have you. You're just getting in the way. You're not proficient. And so I took that learning away from me. Anyway, it was something as don't get in the way of your team. Let them do their job. Don't make a hoo-ha. Don't make a big fuss. Just sit down. When they're finished, go up and say hello and all this type of stuff. Even going into the cockpit before takeoff, before pushback, I'm very quick. I just say, hey guys, how you going? Nice to see you, etc. I'll leave you to it because you're getting everything sorted out. Yeah. So it's that very fine balance of just not getting in the way, learning what's going on. I learn more by talking to customers. I sat between two burly guys last night and I was having a chat to them as to why they were coming to Dubai on us. And so that's what I really spend my time out in front line, is talking to customers, and stay out of the way of our employees to let them get on with the job, because I don't want the fuss.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And, building on that, in your time now at Flyadeal, is there anything from that experience or the way you approach that visibility and your teams? Is there anything you've implemented? Not saying you're asking your guys to, as you said, they're clearly not helping clean, but actually people need to follow you, and not everyone maybe will have that mindset,
Mm.
right? Because well, let's say in this part of the world, that part of working your way up it almost feels like there's the prestige in that as well. Whereas I wouldn't say just low cost carriers. I think good leaders never forget where the heart of the business is.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, to me, I've always got my phone. I've always got my notepad. I'm always taking notes. I am always giving out my card to people, to customers. Sometimes that's not a good idea. I found out. But to me, it is. You even from one flight, if you just take one snippet of something that you hadn't seen before, or you think that's an issue, or what have you, on yesterday's flight, there was sort of a creaking at the bottom of my seat, and I was just texting the head of maintenance and engineering, going, "I'm sitting in this seat and it's making a funny noise. Can you have a look at it?" Type of thing.
Oh my god!
Yeah, exactly. But
of all seats,
exactly. But it's everything.
No.
You hear really interesting things, and you can get the lay of the land in terms of what the hot topics are. A good example is. To be brutally frank, we have a transportation issue with one of our compounds in Riyadh in terms of not frequent enough transportation for the crew and stuff. And again, I found that out at firsthand from them, in terms of, I needed to get to X, Y, and I couldn't because of this, came back and we resolved the issue. So again, you just look for those little gems. You're not looking for a big monumental surprise. You're just looking for the little things that you can take away and bring back that perhaps was just overlooked. It's not bad behavior or anything. It's just something that we didn't see coming, or we're not in that situation.
Okay, great. So look, we've kind of fast tracked. There's so much
Sure.
to get through, actually. But if we talk about this Flyer deal CEO role,
Sure.
I mean, before I move into understanding that, low cost carrier seems to be where a lot of your experience is.
Yeah.
What excites you about the low cost carrier market? What is it that working in those businesses? I mean, because your experience could get you into a lot of different spaces when it comes to aviation.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a real drive, and clearly you're good at it, is one thing.
Thank you.
But actually, what is the drive there? Is it the type of energy? What is it there that really brings you to that low cost carrier market or attracts you to it? What do you like about it?
Yeah, I think so. I was working. Funny enough, I was working in the UK. I was working for Virgin Atlantic. So I went from Qantas to PricewaterhouseCoopers. Loved it. I was actually a part of the Global Aviation Advisory Group, so I was a consultant. So the irony.
Where you
is,
were adding
the
benefit.
irony is not lost on me about your consultancy question. And then I actually moved to Virgin Atlantic, where I was head of sales and distribution strategy, and absolutely loved it. Loved the Virgin Group. And being in the UK at that time, funny enough, EasyJet was the same size as Flyadeal. So it was about 30, 40 aircraft at the time. Ryanair was about 50 or 60 aircraft at the time, again, showing my age. And this was about 2003, 2004. It was just after September 11. They all had, if you recall, September 11 happened, and they both went out and had huge order books on the back of it because no one was buying planes, and they got cheap aircraft and off they went. Never let a crisis go to waste, so to speak. And I was watching this from the UK, and obviously the UK was a hub of LCC activity. UK and Ireland was a hub of LCC activity in Europe. And I was watching this going, how can I sort of get into this? This looks really interesting. The growth story. There were TV shows about EasyJet and you probably remember,
Yeah.
and you sort of watch these. It was like, this looks really cool. This is not corporate. It's not this big corporate thing. It looks like everyone is shoulder to shoulder in the trenches working with this airline. And so I'd see the TV shows, I'd fly them, I'd be reading the news, and my interest was piqued at that time. I thought, I've got to figure out a way to get into an LCC and see what it's like and see if it's for me. And you can probably tell I'm not a suit guy. I think I'm more egalitarian just because of my Australian background. I don't like the corporate hierarchy type of thing and all of this type of stuff. And I knew that pretty early on, but I played the game because you needed that experience and needed to move up. But I was then offered a job at Virgin Blue in Australia. So Virgin Blue was, at that time, Ansett had just gone bankrupt, very, very profitable. And it was an LCC. It's now moved to a full service carrier, but it was an LCC back then. We had like margins of 18%. It was ridiculous. And that was my window. And I took it. And it actually took me back to Brisbane. I never thought I'd come back to Australia, but here I was on a ticket back to Brisbane, scratching my head and telling my parents, "Can I come and stay with you? Because I've got no place to live." And back to Brisbane I went, and then I got my LCC legs there, and then went on from there. I think the bottom line for me, LCCs, by their very nature are more exciting for me. You're more hands-on. It's more of a dynamic, type of business in terms of, even network planning. You try something out. If it doesn't work after a couple of weeks, you shut it down and move on to the next one. If you're doing, British Airways or whoever, long-term plan, it's 2 years to figure out, okay, well, I might try this, then whatever. So it's that dynamism. It is that shoulder to shoulder where you haven't got the hierarchy or a limited hierarchy, where everyone is helping out and trying to achieve the goal. It's that tight time frame, squeezing stuff out of your network and your aircraft in terms of utilization, all the pieces that you need, and it's the execution. And I love it. I've never looked back. I've been doing LCCs now for over 15 years, and I couldn't see myself going in to a full service carrier. I maybe one day, I'm not too sure. Never say never, but for me, it's where the juice, so to speak, for me is LCCs, because it just gives me what I need in terms of satisfaction in terms of work, I suppose. Yeah.
And actually, the leading innovation, particularly when it comes to from a commercial aspect, a lot of it has been led by the low cost carrier market.
Yes.
Absolutely, because it's woken up the rest of the industry. They've had to respond. And at the end of the day, the customer is better for it, because no longer can you just think, oh, well, no one else is flying this route apart from us, so we'll just carry on. And all of a sudden, here comes Stephen with his new model, very lean, simple, does what it says on the tin, and actually probably costs a lot less and gets you to what you want to do, which is actually get off that plane and to that destination and build those experiences and build those memories.
Yeah, I think the memories for me, the ones that stand out are the stories where you meet people on the line who come up to you and say, I want to, and I've genuinely had this many times, I want to thank you because without you, I couldn't have gone see my daughter in wherever. I hadn't seen her for 4 years. And you'd say, why haven't you seen her? And, I'm a pensioner. I can't, and I couldn't afford the trip and it's 4 hours or what have you. And I would have many of those occasions. And I think if you go back to the primary mission of an LCC, which I think sometimes gets lost, LCCs were never started to steal market share from established carriers. It was, established carriers were also, like Lufthansa and stuff, would always say that's the case. It's not. I mean, it's not. You can't thrive as Ryanair by just stealing, if that's your strategy. You thrive by creating a new market or markets and generating new customer segments that would have never flown before. I have weird stuff and I have heartwarming stuff. I have the heartwarming would have been, when I was doing Scoot, I was actually flying down to Sydney and a Singaporean lady, mother of 2 daughters, I believe, both daughters were down in Sydney studying. And she came up to me on the flight and said, thank you so much, because previously I could only go down and see them once a year. Now I can go down and see them 3-4 times a year, keep an eye on them, cook for them. I miss them. And so thank you. There's the flip side of that where I had this. So I remember meeting one lady she came up to me and said, thank you very much. I can go to my hairdresser now. And I'm like, what? And she said to me, she moved from Edmonton to Vancouver, but her favorite hairdresser was in Edmonton, and she would go to him once, and I think I cried more than laughed, because it was like, how cheap was my airfares if she can do this? And I can guarantee the hairdresser was probably charging more. And so, but I have those stories that have that keep me going. When you have difficult parts, you sit there and you go, you're making a difference. If you're doing the job right as a proper LCC, you're making a difference to people's lives, and that to me is fundamental.
And you make a really good point there about where you work, what you're doing, and I think we always try and say that to our listeners about purpose. And like you said, it's about making a difference. Now, whether you're on the tarmac making sure that aircraft gets away, or making sure someone's bag with that wedding dress, or you can come up with any scenario, gets on that plane, or like you said, making sure travel is affordable for whatever that experience is, whether it's the haircut or actually something more meaningful. So no, it's a really important point. Look, we're flying through this conversation, and I guess what I want to get into now is how does one get approached to be the CEO of Flyadeal? How does that conversation happen? So if I'm a mid-senior exec, I've been around the patch, and how does that recruitment process work?
Yeah, I think obviously it differs between airlines, but you know as well as I do, the industry's small. Everyone knows everyone. It's only barely 2 degrees of separation, barely. If I don't know someone, I'll call you and you will know them. I was actually reaching out to someone this morning and going, I want this, and this. And I called a friend and they went, yeah, I'll give you 4 names of people who I know very well who would do that for you. And so I think that's the wonder of the industry. There's very few industries, we had the IATA AGM here just recently. There's very few industries that brings every CEO together in one place and discusses the industry and the topics. What am I trying to say? In terms of when you get to a certain level of seniority, you're already known in the industry for the most part. People will know you, and that's not bragging about who you are or what have you, but you know
but your
sort
achievements. I'm talking to you about the same thing, right?
Achievements, or you've run into them, or you've worked with them. You may have had a partnership with another airline that they work at, as an example, and so you tend to be known. It goes typically geographical. North America sort of keeps to itself, but the rest of the world I sort of know most of the people in Asia. I know most of the people in Europe and the Middle East. So there's that informal network that is all, and informal and formal network that is going on, and a lot of jobs come out of that. Someone who's been, as an example, a good chief operating officer at company X, and it's like, I've had my eye on this guy for a long time, or girl. And I've now got a vacancy. I'll go and reach out to them, see if they're interested, because so there's that formal and informal network. In the case of me, I was headhunted, and there's really only, to be honest, there's probably about 4, 5, 6 maybe global headhunters, and again, they're known by everyone. And they just specialize effectively in aviation and airlines. And they do, I would probably say, 80-90% of the searches out there. So again, a very sort of a closed loop. So in my case, I was headhunted. I was approached. And I think I was predominantly approached because I, got to remember that Flyadeal is an airline with an airline. So we talk about Scoot, we talk about Jetstar. Flyadeal is very much the same, of the same ilk. And so here you have someone who's done it 3 times in terms of setting up and running an airline within an airline, which is not an easy feat, because it's a very different dynamic than setting up something independently.
Absolutely.
And so you sort of start with that, and that's sort of why I was approached. And then one thing led to another, and then I was hired. So that was my story. But again, I know a lot of stories where people have just been reached out because they know someone and bring them over.
How do you, especially now in the role you do, like you said, you're accessible or visible to a lot of people, I'd say, rather than accessible, and you've got to manage that quite carefully. But how do you manage that network? Because it's quite difficult. Like you said, you've got quite a big job on your hands, and we'll get into the kind of the growth, which is phenomenal, and the plans with Flyadeal. How do you, as a person, manage that network or manage those relationships so that, I guess, they're always warm and they don't feel fake, is probably the bit I'm trying to get at, right? How do you do that?
I'm very conscious of not being seen as a climber. And what do I mean by that? There are a number of people out there that you're very good for them today because you serve a purpose, but tomorrow you're gone. You're persona non grata because you're no longer useful or functional to that individual. And I'm very conscious of that, and I stay away from that type of personality. And there are people out there like that. For me, I try to construct genuine relationships that are ongoing. And a lot of the friendships that I have in the industry are people I've known for 10 or 20 years, the deep relationships that I have. And apart from that, it's always just that cycle of communication. I talked about reaching out to someone today. They're a good friend. He's in MRO. I've known him for many years. He's the CEO of a big MRO shop. And again, it's just that constant, just catching up, how's things going, chewing the fat whenever you get the chance, let's have a coffee, catch up type of thing. So for me, it's more of an informality rather than I'm calling you because I need something from you, if that makes sense. And that's not me. So creating that network and being able to do that. The other thing is also, to be frank, being very selective. Again, we're in an industry that we have a few key events in the year that everyone comes to. And so we've just had the IATA AGM.
Yes, yeah.
We're actually not an IATA member. We're going to be an IATA member next year, hopefully, or by the end of this year, hopefully. But again, this is a great opportunity to sit on the sidelines and be able to catch up with people and then renew those relationships and build on those relationships. So very conscious that I try to go to a handful of events in the year, which gives me a great opportunity to sort of get around and network and see what's going on, see through firsthand experience some of the innovations that are going on in the industry and so forth as well.
Yeah. So I guess that's a really great insight. I think it's about being genuine. I think that comes across really importantly for you. And I like the way you just said there, that kind of build, maintain, and touch base, right? It's and that therefore it is genuine, right? You've bumped into, Stephen, how are you doing? Rather than, I messaged you the other day, you didn't get back to me, or sorry, I didn't message you, or what have you. Try and keep it as natural.
Where's that so and so? Blah blah blah. Yeah. Very much so.
No, thank you. That's really really useful, and I know it'd be useful for our listeners. The next question I'd have is probably taking you back a few more years before you get to that kind of CEO role.
Okay.
Is what advice would you be giving to those kind of mid-senior execs that are looking for that next step up in aviation? So they're building careers, because we always use this talking about how to get into the industry, and we're very keen to make sure people see how attractive the industry is. And obviously we're biased, but for me, I think it's one of the great industries. The variety in it is phenomenal, and what you can take out of it. But actually, now you're there, you've forged a career, you're kind of there. What would your advice be to those kind of senior managers looking for that next step? What should they be looking to do?
So I think, first of all, I would say that my career was never preordained. I mean, you sort of, if you look at the steps and so forth, people go, how did you sort of come up with that? No, I would say I didn't. I just took opportunities as they came and evaluated them. I think that what I would say to most people is that, we touched on executive programs as an example, that you don't have this mapped out career progression these days with a lot of companies. You simply don't. They talk about succession planning and mapping out careers and stuff. A lot of companies do it woefully. It just doesn't exist. They talk about it, but they don't really do it. And so, I know a lot of people who get stuck. Well, I'm in this company, got a good package, etc., but I'm stuck because the guy above me or girl above me is not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere for the next 5-10 years. And that person's not going anywhere either, as in they can't. So there's this internal rigidity. It's particularly true of LCCs, unfortunately, because again, by the nature of the flat structure, you really don't get too much of an opportunity to move people around. That's just a reality. Yeah. You're not a huge operation, particularly at our office. So opportunities are thin for most mid-tier LCCs, to be fair. A different story for larger full-service carriers, but for the most part, you see, as an example, I think Lufthansa is very good. They move their people around. They just announced a new CEO for Swiss, who came from CityLink, if I'm not mistaken. But I think they're actually quite good at moving people around and giving them different experiences. But in the LCC world, it's actually quite difficult to do. Even in a full service carrier, your great experience is going and being a country manager somewhere, because you're a mini CEO. You get to do everything: operations, commercial. As an LCC, you don't have any country managers. Everything is outsourced. So again, it's that practicality level. What am I trying to say? For me, and I'm referring to the LCC space, but I think just in general, that you have to make your own opportunities, and you have to be very selective in doing that. If I look back, I think how lucky I've been, and luck has been in the right place at the right time. Obviously, that old saying, but how lucky I've been that I could have taken a misstep, that I could have gone off and done insurance at some stage. I kid you not. And I'm sure insurance is a great career for people, but not for me. But I could have had some missteps along the way, and I've had missteps along the way in my career for sure. I've made some poor decisions, but as a whole, I've been able to keep the momentum going and so forth. So I've been very lucky in doing that. So to me, I think the advice is that, particularly with the rigidity that I talk about, that I've spoken about, is that sometimes you're having to leave or exit a business to move either into a new area laterally, or move up the food chain at another carrier or another company or something like that. When you're given that opportunity, be incredibly selective, because again, by the very nature of the business that we're in, you're probably going to have to move. And so there's a big lifestyle impact along with everything else, because you only have a certain number of airlines in a country. And you want to now progress and you'll be approached. You may have to move halfway around the world or what have you. So again, some of the executives that I've met who have been incredibly successful are open and willing to pack their bags and do that march and move, because it means that they're moving up the food chain, or they're getting promoted, or they've been given opportunities they wouldn't get at their existing employer.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, it's yes, you can do a certain mapping. Where do I want to be? What type of role do I want? But equally, it is the balancing out of being aware of opportunities and going after them, and being flexible enough that you're prepared to take that opportunity, particularly in the industry that we are in.
No, I think it's a great way to sum that up, right? Like you're saying, don't be rigid, a loose plan, and be open to opportunities. That's a really great way of hopefully those listeners that are thinking about what they want to do next. Helping guide them to do that. Okay, so look, we want to kind of talk about the future now, and I think that goes for you, Stephen, and also Flyadeal. So, what does the near-term future hold for Flyadeal? I think what is going on in that space is phenomenal. I think there is obviously amazing growth in Saudi Arabia. It's the talk of the town. Everyone's kind of looking over and taking an interest. What do you feel like? What's in the plans for you? Without giving too much away, but obviously we understand that. But in terms of what is the strategy at the moment when it comes to Flyadeal?
Yeah, I think there's three things. There's the country level, because you're tightly integrated in terms of what national objectives are. So we're talking Vision 2030 basically. So obviously the opening up of the economy, the diversification of the economy, the tourism targets that we're speaking about. All of these things are relative to us. So. And again, this is particular to Saudi Arabia, to be honest. You don't get this experience in many other places. So you have the Vision 2030, which is driving a lot of things, all the mega projects, all the way down to what we're doing in our growth story. So that's number one. Number two is that we're part of the Saudia Group. So that is a great opportunity for us, because the group as a whole is growing. Saudia Group is actually 9 companies. Everyone thinks of Saudi Airlines, which is obviously the prominent part of the group. But you have Saudia Technic, you have SGS, you have catering, you have all this type of stuff. So it's quite a large company. We're one of the 9 companies. So you've got the Saudia Group and what they're doing, and they're having a massive transformation, phenomenal transformation, and being recognised for that in terms of the best improved in Skytrax just recently and everything. So you've got that dynamic going on, and we're part of that family. That's probably the best way to describe it. And so that's going on. And then you have Flyadeal in terms of, so you've gone through all these filters and now to Flyadeal. The immediate term for us, or at least the medium to long term, I suppose, is, we've been very public. The next 4 years, we triple in size. We get up to 100 aircraft. So we're 33 at the moment. We'll be 100 or so in the next 4 to 5 years. So huge growth. If you look at where we're at as an airline and overlay that with EasyJet and Ryanair, we're actually growing faster. So yes, they're much bigger at this moment, but they're also much older. But if you look at where EasyJet and Ryanair were at the 5-year mark, which is where we are, 5-6 year mark, we're of similar size, and our trajectory to get us to the 10-year mark means that we're actually a bigger operation than they were. So that is exciting. You don't get that growth profile or growth story in many parts of the world. So you have the national piece going on, the transformation at Saudia Group, and then you have Flyadeal tripling in size. So you're juggling all of this at any one time, and all of them are interlinked and interplayed. So that's that's the exciting part of being part of that. You look, it's phenomenal when you have people from other parts of the world looking and going, I just wish I was part of this. I wish I was, I want to be part of this. And so from my perspective, incredibly humbled, but also excited just to be part of it, because you just don't get that opportunity too often to enjoy that moment.
Well, I mean, that's what I would say, because obviously we will have listeners all over the world, right? Some people are thinking that's a phenomenal amount of growth in a short space of time. How do you make sure that's done in a sustainable way?
Yep.
And B, is there enough demand for that growth?
So I think, so where do I start? This year we have a very basic strategy. It's called Fixing the Basics. That's it. I know it's plain and boring. We didn't get consultants to write that, by the way. Came up with it internally. But you talk about sustainable growth. You talk about, for me, it's foundational, is that have we got all the foundational pieces in place? And it's everything from pilot contracts and making sure that we've got a really good, attractive pilot contract, to staffing at headquarters in terms of how we staff out, or how we build out the teams within head office and also outside of head office, but making sure we're well resourced, making sure systems processes people effectively, but making sure we have all of that. And as we were a startup. I find a lot of startups always hold on to the startup mantra for way too long. It's like it's like saying you're in your mid-teens, but you're still a baby type of thing, if that makes sense. So there are a lot of things that I think that were done as an example on a rudimentary spreadsheet that it should actually have a full system supporting it, and pay for it. Yeah. So there's those type of things that we're investing in this year. They're all the boring things that no one ever wants to talk about. Everyone wants to talk about lounges, first class, and new aircraft and what have you. They never talk about all those foundational pieces that really do move the needle when it comes to customer satisfaction. So as an example, we have a new mobile app we launched in February. We have 32 developments between now and the end of the year, which will enhance that app across the board, all different things. Wow. But, it's the shiny planes that get the attention. You know what I mean? That's the narrative.
Yeah.
And that's why we call it fixing the basics. And I've told everyone I'm a boring guy. I want this year to be boring. I want us just to focus on getting these things across the line because it will pay dividends next year when we start seeing the accelerated growth and when the aircraft really do start coming in.
Maybe where your Singaporean experience is coming in with that kind of.
It could be. I don't know.
Strategy,
I always call myself I've always called myself just a builder. I love to build, and what I've inherited is probably a great sort of small workers' cottage, which is wonderful. But we now need to turn it into a mansion, if that makes sense, and building that out and making sure that works and making sure you have all the utilities linked in and everything. That's the sort of piece that I love doing, and that's the piece that we're doing at the moment and we'll be doing for the next couple of years. But at least when the aircraft really start coming in from next year, you've got all of this in place. Everything from your deep recruitment pipelines, be it pilots, cabin crew, whatever, all the way through to structure to systems that you can manage it effectively.
Okay. Well, you bring me on to my next bit really well, actually, the way you start talking about the pipelines around talent. Like you said, aircraft, fixing the basics is great, but fundamentally, we're going to need talent. We're going to need people. You're going to need, if you just look at Fly a Deal. Sure. How does the Saudi Arabian market make sure it attracts talent?
Well, this is the wonderful thing about Saudi Arabia. They're investing in their people. So when you talk about 2030, the mega projects always take the headlines. The NEOMs, all this type of stuff, and that's understandable. Everyone loves the big projects.
Yeah.
But beneath that, if you look, and I wish it was more reported, there's a lot of stuff about equality, home ownership, life expectancy, education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so how does that then, what does that mean to us? What we have as a practical example is the government is sponsoring young people to get their pilot's license, to get an education, get their pilot's license. And so they're setting up schools overseas and partnering with schools, and you have this steady stream. So I'm actually in a wonderful position where you've got a lot of airlines saying, I'm short of pilots and I've got no pipeline and everything like that. And I'm sitting there going, my pipeline is overflowing. Wow. I've actually got pilots who are cabin crew at the moment because they're waiting to get their next turn to part of the cadet program. So we launched our first cadet program at the start of the year. Second one's just been run now, and we're clearing the backlog. But we have got an abundance. So what I'm trying to say is the country is really forward-looking at the moment and investing in their people. And pilots always, the headliners, but you've got a whole engineering cadre coming through. Yeah. Saudia Technic is, I think, pumping out. I know Captain Cindy, who runs it's probably going to get me angry at me, but I think there's like 300-400 engineers a year at the moment they're putting through. Where it came, that's up from 40, I think, or 50 only a couple of years ago.
National thinking, national plan,
the national plan
really makes sense.
So, and they want to build out the aviation sector, so they want to get involved. They want to get involved in manufacturing. They want to get involved in high-end and high-value processes. And so you're getting all of that support. I mean, it really is fundamentally changing. When I've worked in other jurisdictions where it's like nothing. You got absolutely nothing. And here it's everyone is working together in an ecosystem to try to build the ecosystem out. That's number one. Number two, I think your question was around, how long is this going to go for and so forth. I would say, I won't say forever, of course, but effectively my answer to you would be Saudi Arabia really only, dare I say, ripped the Band-Aid off only 4 or 5 years ago in terms of opening the country up. There is a long way to go. We're growing domestically at about a 10 to 15% clip at the moment. And so there is a long way to go. There is a relatively affluent market very young population. People who, it's still the country has not been discovered by a lot of people. Going to Saudi Arabia 4, 5, 10 years ago wouldn't have been on anyone's radar.
Yeah.
Now, you saw yourself at the Aviation Festival. It's a hub.
Yeah.
People are wanting to come, conferences. All of this never happened.
No.
So you've got that going on. You've got the religious pilgrimages going on. The market has been opened up for proper tourism and so forth. So I think this has got quite a long way to go. And it's a big country. You've got a lot of people, a big country, no land, well, you've got roads and so forth, but there's significant distances. So air transportation plays a key part of moving people around in that country. So all of this combined in my mind is, this has got quite long legs on it, to be honest. We are not a mature market. We have got a long way to go to get up to, say, where Europe is or North America is, or even countries like Australia. Huge way to go. So all of this combined, to me, it sort of tells me that this has got some long legs, certainly over the next couple of years.
Look, I think it's a great way you've put it, because actually, like you said, you've got one angle of people who I think look at it from an industry perspective saying, how damn exciting is this?
Yeah.
Like, I really want to be involved in this, be part of this, because you don't get these opportunities very often.
No.
But you also get the ones looking across saying, really? How? And I think the way you've just demonstrated that, like that kind of national mindset, that national plan, but the fact that actually just educating people about the fact that how big that country is, and the fact that actually we're just scratching the surface, because the next question ultimately naturally would be, well, do you need a flyer deal? Do you need do you need so many airlines? But actually, as you said, there is clearly a demand. The Band-Aid, I think you put that really well. The Band-Aid's just been ripped off.
Yeah.
So there's clearly opportunity for Saudi, and we know aviation is a massive enabler when it comes to economic growth.
And look, what I would say, there's a lot of people on the fence just throwing stones. I'd much rather be on the ground doing something and helping out and participating. And to me, being on the ground as I have for the past 8 or 9 months, even I was skeptical. I'll be frank, I was skeptical when when my first offer, I was thought, do I really want to do this? Is it for real? And I went down, I did my due diligence, I spoke to a lot of people. Everyone, I was actually surprised. Everyone uniformly said, "You've got to go. You just go. Don't say no. Just go." And turning up, I'm glad I did. I certainly thought through it a lot, but I'm glad I did. And you see change every day. If things were stagnant, you go, "Oh, maybe this is not the real deal." But you are seeing change every day. You're seeing dynamism in the market. And I love it. You just don't get the equivalence. Someone asked me about it before, but the equivalence I've seen. I was lucky when Scoot was started back in 2011. It was China and Asia and booming, and China was leading that growth. Obviously it's petered off now because of COVID and so forth and what have you. But effectively, it was sort of what I saw in Singapore. Obviously, China's on a much larger scale, but you truly do have a country that was, almost, dare I say, a hermit kingdom. It just didn't allow people in.
Yeah.
People didn't travel that much. That's completely and utterly changed now, and you have new customer segments. You didn't have, as an example, females deciding, "Oh, let's go to Dubai for shopping on the weekend."
Yeah.
Just didn't happen.
Yeah.
In reality, now that is frequent. It's not even second guessed. I ran into someone at the head office the other day, and I sort of said, "What are you doing for the weekend?" So, going with my sister, we're going to go shopping. You wouldn't have had that.
Yeah.
And so you take that as a microcosm, you multiply it to all the other customer segments that are opening up. It's booming.
So kind of common markets we'd expect in Europe, US are just opening up and starting to.
And this is the piece that I missed when I was doing my assessment. I just didn't think that. And being on the ground, you sit there and go, now I get it.
Yeah.
This is different, and so we've got a long way to go.
Well, the flyer deal growth isn't coming quick enough. You need to get more flights to Dubai. I can tell you, it's very difficult for me to get on those when I'm going across to Saudi Arabia.
Dubai, you can't get it. Certain times of the year you can't get a seat between Dubai and the kingdom for love or money. It just cannot. So.
Well, we were looking at some stats actually last week. Actually, now one of the third busiest routes in the world in terms of traffic. It's phenomenal.
Jeddah Riyadh.
Yeah.
I think Dubai Riyadh is probably one of the busiest international, but the Jeddah Riyadh is the third by capacity at the moment. Yeah. I think it will be number one within a year. I mean, we alone have over the summer we have 23 flights each way a day. Yeah. And we're not alone. Flynas is the same, and so Saudi. So you're talking about 70 flights a day each way. And it just, we have growth plans. I'm sure the others have growth plans as well. I would see that route being number one, and that knocks off well-established routes like Sydney, Melbourne, or Tokyo, Osaka, that have been there for decades. And this has come out of nowhere into the top 10, I think, in the past couple of years, and will be the top within the next 12 months. That's my prediction. So, yeah.
Wow. You're hearing it here. If you had any doubts about Saudi Arabia and where it's going, I think you can actually see the growth and actually firsthand. I mean, we can both sit here and demonstrate that. My last question before we move on to one of our favorite segments on here, which is a quick fire round. So I'm giving you a pre-warning now.
Pre-warning.
But so those people now, when we're going back to our people interested in aviation, if they want to get into Saudi Arabia and aviation, what advice would you be giving them in terms of those opportunities, or what mindset they need to have?
Yeah. So a couple of things. As part of the 2030 vision, there's the Saudiization program. So as an example, we're incentivized to have functions and jobs that are being undertaken by Saudis. And that's great for national development and everything. Why would you choose a foreigner when you can get a Saudi to do the job? So as an example, by October, 100% of our first officers will be Saudi nationals.
Wow.
Etc. So, and we have other functions as well. So what am I trying to say? There are certain roles now, cybersecurity is a good example, that have to be Saudi nationals by law. So you have to pick and choose. What I'm saying is there are certain specialist functions and so forth that you won't have access to in the market. You just simply won't by law. And that's just a reality. So make sure you do your research, number one, and see, does that scratch out an opportunity for you because you're a cybersecurity expert, but you can't do that. As an example, I don't mean to pick on cybersecurity, it's only an example. So that's number one. Number two, there is a lot going on, and just as in Singapore and what have you, the Saudis know that they need foreign talent to help them achieve their goal, and they want to bring in people to the country. They want to expose people to the country, and they want people to contribute to the growth in the 2030 vision. And so I think just be open-minded in that, in terms of there are plenty of opportunities on the table for sure. If you go looking, you will find. But again, goes back to my previous point 20 minutes ago or so, is be selective. Make sure that it's fitting the path that you wish to do. And I think that the way Saudi is sort of imaging itself, it's now seen as a feather in your cap as opposed to sort of maybe a retirement spot, which it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, to be honest. And so now it's seen as a great stepping stone, very dynamic market. People are coming because they want to be part of that. And so I think, so what I'm trying to say, you make sure that the opportunities are open to you, to a foreigner. Number two, if you look, you will find there are plenty of opportunities with everything from engineering all the way through to airlines proper and even pilots, because you've got, as an example, Riyadh Air starting. And so they're bringing recruiting domestically and internationally and so forth, as an example. And also, I think be open-minded. You've still got a conservative society that you're living in. Yeah. It is changing, but like any place, I mean, you can't impose your own beliefs and values on the country you're going to. Absolutely. You have to accept what is going on. If you don't accept it, leave. So be open-minded, prepare to adapt, prepare to be able to work internationally, but also locally, and balance that out. Because again, like any country, the Saudis have different ways of working versus the Japanese, versus the Singaporeans, versus the British. Have to be open-minded in that perspective and make sure that you're able to integrate effectively. So all of those things come together. It sounds like a huge list, but it's not. It's just... get in there.
Don't worry, we'll snip that up and make that look. It will look a lot more concise. But no, it's a wonderful way to end. Actually, going back to what we're doing here is talking about travel, and the opportunities it provides, not only for work but actually experiences. And actually, one of the big things there is that you're mentioning there is about that cultural understanding and ways of working, which is equally as valuable. I think you've demonstrated through your career about moving around has enabled you to broaden that horizon and better your understanding. So.
Yeah, and I think I'm always constantly surprised. I always was brought up that I did a stint in Canada for a number of years. I was brought up that Canadians are just like Australians, and that was actually informed by Canadians who had lived in Australia. And Australians are very good at making sure that you conform.
Yeah.
You whatever part of the world you come from, you're now Australian, and you're going to have a beer and a barbecue and everything else, and that's it, right? And so I was actually just seeing Canadians that were converted to Australians. So I was informed by that. When I went to Canada, and here I was thinking, sort of similar background, English speaking, same type of education, blah 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 blah. This is just going to be like Australia, so not a problem. I couldn't be more wrong. I had a huge cultural shock. Huge, bigger than I moved to Singapore.
Wow.
And I think I just had this expectation of growing up, naive, I accept, that when I got to Canada, they're just like Australians, and they work this particular way, and they have these particular views. I was so wrong. And I really misstepped in the first couple of months, because I just assumed stuff I shouldn't, where I should have been far more observing, listening, and absorbing, as opposed to just coming in and nonchalantly sort of saying, "Well, it's just, I don't have to worry about this." So that was an interesting one. So even that was like the 12th country I'd lived in, and you still, even with all those experiences, you still stumble, and so that was an eye opener for me. The actual interesting thing is the transition to Saudi Arabia was far easier than Canada, in a bizarre way. I just slipped straight in. Love it. I don't know how to explain it, but it's sort of just my level, I suppose, and the way my brain works. But had a far easier time and a far more comfortable time than actually moving to Canada, which is bizarre. But that's maybe that's what I was looking for.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, look, that kind of concludes the interview segment. Phew. So thank you so much, Stephen. I mean, there's just been so much in here for us, and I didn't think we even scratched the surface. We haven't really gone into a lot of your career because of time, and actually some of the great insights you've already shared with us. So I really, really appreciate that. We're going to move on to a bit more of a lighthearted section we have. So our members know this as the quick fire round. So the idea is we'll ask you some rapid questions from previous episodes and questions that have come in from our audience in the past that work really well. Some of them quirky, some of them a bit less quirky. And the idea is hopefully if you can give us a one-word answer or a one-liner and
That's
keep
tough.
it snappy.
Yep.
And then, we'll take it from there. So this is our rapid fire round, our quick fire round for our members and viewers. So hopefully you'll like it. And we're gonna see learn a little bit more about Stephen in that sense as well. Okay. So we'll start with some easy ones. Okay. When it comes to aviation, aisle or window?
Window, because I can lean on it and go to sleep.
My kind of guy. Chicken or beef?
Chicken.
Favorite aircraft type?
747.
I thought you would have gone more of the narrow bodies. Eh?
No. 747 as a childhood, that was your ticket out to the country. It was the only aircraft that could sort of do the range. So as growing up, Qantas was an all 747 operator for a while there. All I remember is just flying on a 747 everywhere. That was the only way you could get anywhere. And still to this day, I think the plane's iconic. I seek those that are still flying, like Lufthansa and stuff. And sadly, I didn't get to participate in some of the retirements. BA, Qantas, I had tickets to go fly them, sort of my last farewell, and didn't get the chance because of COVID. But an iconic plane that brought the world, created a smaller world in my mind.
I agree.
And just the sound, just the sound, the smell, it was designed and built in 2.5 years. Anyway, I'll stop there. But truly,
more than one line, but
truly an iconic aircraft.
Perfect. Favorite airport?
Changi.
Yeah, it's a lot of our previous guests have said.
I don't think I'm alone in that, to be honest. Yeah.
Are you an early lounger or a late gate dasher?
Early lounger, very, very much so. I don't like rushing. I don't like being late, and I would hate to think that the airline I'm working for, I cause a delay, which I would never allow. But I just I never missed a flight bar one in my life, so that's it. So
Perfect.
Get to the airport early.
Yeah. Well, it's good for your OTP anyway, for everyone listening. Okay, one item that you couldn't live without when traveling.
That would be my Rimowa bag. So like my carry-on. I never check in. So there's another tip. Never check in, folks. Please. But utility bag. It's been with me for years. Damaged to hell, but it just keeps on going. And without that, that I can survive at least a week with. And so that's my go-to. Not
a sponsorship plug, but if you want, if Rimowa are listening, you're more than welcome to contact.
It'd be a good sponsor, but it's so iconic, and it's just part of me when I'm traveling.
No, great. If you could sit next to one person on a flight, let's call it long haul because it gives you a bit of time. Who would it be and why?
Winston Churchill. I think it'd be really interesting. He drinks a lot, so that'll be good fun. But I think you'd have some interesting stories. Or the other one would definitely be Steve Jobs, who is iconic in himself, and I'd love to have that time with him.
Your earliest aviation memory?
Flying 747. Don't ask me where. I just remember being at the back with my parents. Going somewhere, but I just remember. You always difficult to remember that first instance. But I think I was probably 3 or 4, and I was on a plane traveling somewhere with my parents, and we were sitting in a row of 3. I just remember that, and I was at the window. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite travel destination and why?
Favorite travel destination, Bangkok. I just love the city. I love the food. Things are cheap. The smells, the sights. I've just always loved Bangkok as a sort of a go-to, just an enjoyable. There's always a lot of entertainment going on. There's a lot of things going on, shopping, etc. It's just a great utility city just to go to and either chill or be manic or everything in between.
Perfect. Okay. Your worst travel experience?
Maldives. I was on my honeymoon, and I know this makes me sound cheap and nasty, but it's not meant to be. But so you do the Maldives thing when you get married, and off we went, and we had this lovely place, but all I did was just sit there and go, how much am I paying for this? And I'm stuck here. And you're at this resort, and all you've got is like there for a week, and you've got the choice of 2 restaurants, and it's like by the second night you're like, there's no variety.
I feel like from this conversation, I could actually see this in you.
I can't go. I was terrible. I was just terrible. So never again. But I don't know. But I'm sure Maldives is lovely for everyone. But for me, I felt like I was trapped.
Okay. Biggest innovation game changer you think is coming to aviation right now?
Look, there's a lot of froth. It's peakish about AI, but I do genuinely believe that if applied correctly, that it can be a game changer in many areas. As to be clear, a decision support tool. I'm not advocating that it replaces people or anything, but I think that, again, it's that second opinion. It's that not gamification, but it's that playing out of scenarios and so forth. Network planning. Okay, throw it in. Let's see what it comes back with versus what we're planning. How do we optimize those type of things? So I do think, there's a lot of froth, there's a lot of talk, but if you try to cut through some of that, there are genuine advances and innovation going on in that space. And I think it will only get stronger over the next couple of years.
Okay. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
20-year-old self, drink less, eat less, try to run and have, a bit more exercise, I think. That would be my guess.
Fair enough. And our last question, it's a new one. It came in from our viewers. Why did you come to the Flying High Club today?
Well, we met, and I was very impressed. And I think you as a CEO, you have a lot of people come. You have a lot of interactions, and a lot of them are very insincere, to be frank, and so forth. I found our conversation really insightful, and when you sort of said, "I've got the podcast, would you be interested?" Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to, and I also appreciate the long form, rather than the 5 minute, not even that, the 2 minute sound bite. I appreciate the long form. To me, it's mentally stimulating. You're going through and you're thinking through things rather than just trying to get 2 words out that someone will hang on to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. And for us, it's just soaking up so much knowledge. We're trying to take as much out, absorb so much from guests like yourself. So we appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
So that's the end of that round. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hopefully, you did.
10 out of 10.
We'll let our viewers judge, yeah? So if you want to rate Stephen in the comments, please let us know.
Okay.
So look, that is the end for us. So I hope you had a good time. I certainly had a great time talking to you,
Likewise.
Hearing about your career. The one last thing we are now launching for this series is, you may have seen on other podcasts, I think it actually works really well because actually we don't necessarily, like you said, apart from IATA, AGMs and things like this, get senior execs together. We now have the flight log, what we like to call it, and we'd like you to put a question in here for the next guest who's going to come along. Obviously, you don't know who they are, so hopefully an open question that we'll then be able to use on the next podcast, and hopefully we can get your Stephen Greenway in there, your John Hancock to sign, and hopefully it becomes quite a memorable piece for us as well as we start on this journey. So you'll be the first to write in that for us.
Appreciate it.
We'll get some pictures of that. But like I said, genuinely, I really, really mean it. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I have no doubt when we launch this, there's so many insights for our audiences to take away. And I hope you've been able to kind of hopefully reflect on what an incredible journey so far, and clearly is unfinished. And we're really looking forward to what that brings for you and us in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been a great honor.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cheers.